So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for logging in early September for our Breakfast Club for Fundraising Leaders. If you've not worked with me before, my name is Rob. I love to help fundraisers raise more money and really enjoy their job. We are going to make a start now. I'll try and move this chat to the side a little. So last time I checked with Katie, there were 728 people had registered to attend our little Breakfast Club for Fundraising Leaders. So thank you. I know there's plenty of other places you could be. Thank you for making time to do an hour and 10 minutes learning before you get on with your day job. I really appreciate you showing up and making the time. Thanks, by the way, to everyone who's sharing and tweeting so we can spread the word and help get these ideas to help some other people. If you've not done a Breakfast Club with us before, two things I'm trying to achieve in this hour. One is some things and some examples that might help you as a fundraising leader. And two, some ideas that you might choose to pass on and share with your team if you think that will help them in their jobs. Two or three things that can help you make the most of a session like this. One of them is have some way you can write down a good idea that might come to you. Number two, it's really easy to just sort of rush back to all the day job and the emails. I would plan, whether it's lunchtime today or whenever it is, plan a time when you're going to reflect on what you learned today or your ideas, because it's the implementation, the execution that makes the world a better place, not just being at a session and hearing something. Lastly, there will be a bit of time to ask some questions to Sonya and Alice after their talk. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, please start it in the chat. To type the word question in capitals before you ask your question. That'll increase the chances amongst the many comments for me and Katie to find your question, and we can hopefully pose as many of them as we can to Alice and Sonya. In terms of timings, in a moment I'll introduce Sonya, who's going to do a 10-ish minute talk. Then Alice from Chance for Childhood is going to do a 10-ish minute talk. Then there should be hopefully at least 10, if not a bit more minutes for some Q&A, so that you can ask them about the practicalities of their kind of topic. And then after that, I'm going to do a presentation sharing some things I hope might just help you during this difficult winter that is coming. So I'm going to take my slides away now so Sonya can potentially bring hers up. Goodness, I first worked with Sonya quite a few years ago. She's been an excellent fundraiser for more than 20 years. She's, I think, been the lead in charge of fundraising at Samaritans for 3.5 years. She's worked in charities of different sizes, and she was sharing a few months ago about what her charity had been doing in terms of special thanking days, and how pleased she was and her colleagues were with how that was going. And I asked her to come along and share her take on the Thankathon concept. And after that, we're going to go to Alice, who works for a smaller charity, to get her take, so that whoever you are listening, you've got both points of view. So without more ado, I'm really delighted to hand over to Sonya to share what she's learned about thanking days.
Thanks, Rob. Lovely to know that so many of you are out there. I can't see you all, which is a shame. Maybe a good thing, I don't know, in terms of knowing that there's so many out there. But lovely to be with you all this morning. So I could chat for ages about thanking days. I love them. I would really encourage you to think about doing something like this. So just to say a little bit about me. So yes, Rob's introduced me, been in the sector for 20 odd years now. So I work at Samaritans. So for anybody that doesn't know Samaritans, we are the UK and Ireland's leading suicide prevention charity. We are best known for our helpline, but we use lots of different channels to for people to access us, to provide emotional support for anyone struggling to cope. We are there 24/7 for people, and we take a call for help every 10 seconds. So as you can imagine, needed more than ever now, and particularly during these last few years. Okay. So I think if you were to do a thanking day, it would really firmly sit within what's already in your income generation strategy. So the first thing for me is about a culture of fundraising. So I will say this at every single chance I get in all staff meetings. I will say to my colleagues that our supporters are amazing. Out of the thousands of charities they could support, they chose to support us. They chose to stand with us. And your supporters are amazing. You know, we want to continually thank them for all they're doing for us. But we know that sometimes fundraising doesn't rise to the top in our organisations. So for us, we have a particular theme around creating a culture of fundraising, and doing a thanking day is a brilliant way of instilling that. As I say, also understanding their motivations and thanking them. So, I can see my connection's unstable, so I really hope you're getting some of this. So putting supporters at the core is really, really important. And then the last thing is around test and learn. So we want to continually innovate with our fundraising programme. So what we want to do with something like Thanking Day is continually learn how we can thank donors and do better by them. So we all remember those moments, don't we, when we've had an amazing thank you or really great experience from buying a product or a service. So in the top here, I've got this picture of some flowers that were sent through to me at Christmas, totally unexpected. Our lead fundraising volunteer who does a 3-year term recently finished her term. She sent this wonderful box of goodies to our office, full of healthy stuff and not so healthy stuff. I bagged myself a wham bar, it reminded me of my youth, but what a wonderful gift that Belinda had sent to us. And I'm sure for all of you, you think about how you're going to create these moments for your supporters. You might call it surprise and delight, you might call it the wow moment, but how you can give your supporters that really different experience that's going to make you shine through. So one of the things that we do with our thanking days, we always start with a speaker. So last year we had Dr. Chris Irons, who's a psychologist, who was talking to us about the power of gratitude. So really it's thinking about, you know, how grateful we are for what's around us. And one of those things is our supporters. And then this year we had the brilliant Roger Lawson from About Loyalty. Anybody that doesn't know that organisation, please do look them up. They do fabulous work. And Roger talked to us about the power of thanking for instilling loyalty. So that was a really great way to start our thanking day. So we've done 2 of these at Samaritans. I've also done these at previous organisations. And one of the things is it is about galvanising the whole of the organisation to get behind it. So it's not just about the fundraising team or you as the single fundraiser. It's about everyone in the organisation talking to supporters. And actually it really helps those around us really understand people's motivations for supporting. And we know that when we do deliver thank yous, often that's turned back on us and people thanking us for what we're doing. So really to understand that connection that we have with them. So we thank all of our supporters during this day. And what's really key within this is about deepening loyalty. We know that as organisations, times are going to be tougher, more so than ever, and we really need to be finding ways of creating that financial stability. Thanking supporters is an absolutely key aspect of that. So to tell you a little bit about what we did, so we did personalised thanks, so we did calls, so we had a script for people and then they could personalise it based on that supporter and how they'd supported us. Then we had cards, handwritten, and we did Bonjoro videos. Unfortunately, I can't show this film, but there's an example in the top right-hand corner. And these are absolutely fabulous. They're really easy to use. So I encourage you to look them up. And you just what we call a simple message. And what happens is an email goes through to the recipient, you go onto the link, and then the video plays. Now, where I think this is really, really great is particularly with trusts and major donors. Quite often you can't necessarily get through to that, you know, the chief executive or that really key decision maker. You might go through a gatekeeper. But actually, by sending something through like this through, it can go to the administrator, and then they can forward it on, because they can see that it's only going to take a minute, 2 minutes to watch the video, and you can really personalize it around that support that trust or major donor has given. We had our leadership team involved in this and our trustees. Again, brilliant feedback from them. One of our trustees wrote to me and said it was like the best day of her month. And she was saying that how the person that she'd spoken to, her sister was struggling with mental health issues and had used Samaritans when other services weren't available to her. The sister then went on to talk about how her and her mum were doing all they can to support Samaritans, and she talked about her 50,000 social media followers and what fundraising she was going to go on to do. So, you know, brilliant conversation about the motivation and what fundraising this person was going to go on to do. We did lots of videos to support this from case studies, but I also did a few videos personally thanking people for their support, but also internally really galvanizing everyone to get behind this. We had lots of assets that we used. And then the other thing is incentivization. So really getting everyone behind this. So last year you could win a subscription to our Feel Good Book Club. This year you could get an extra day's annual leave. So obviously people were keen to get involved with that. So we know that comms are really, really important, and that continual drumbeat around doing something like this. So for us, it's about the build up. So I might speak at the all staff meeting, our chief executive might put a message out to all staff and volunteers to get involved in this. And then it's on the day thinking about how you start it, getting everyone in the office excited by it, then that social media messaging coming throughout the day, and then also sharing the successes of the day with colleagues. So really, really to keep that comms going and for everyone to understand the importance of a day like this. So for this year, we had 143 staff who volunteered, and to put that into context, around this time, we probably had about 250 staff within the organisation. So a good deal of people getting involved. And what was really lovely is when I put a note on LinkedIn to say I was doing this talk, someone who recently left the organisation put a note on LinkedIn to say that it's one of the best days. She said, "I love Thanking Day at Samaritans, such an amazing day." So really, really great feedback from staff. We had loads of volunteers getting involved, and we reached over 4,000 supporters, so absolutely brilliant. Couple of bits of feedback here. Thank you, Carl, for that very nice and surprising video message. I was not expecting that. I just want to say how much I appreciate all you do at Samaritans, helping people through the most difficult times of their lives. So really important that we continually learn from what's working. So there was loads of goodwill around doing this day. But we know that we do want to incentivise people to really get as many people involved. We actually worked out that we were only getting about 15% response on calls. So in future, we probably will prioritise videos and emails. The other thing is about creating that buzz in the office. This year, we didn't have as many people in the office. And we know that right now we're giving people flexibility, but when we do get people in the office, for whatever day it is, we want for people to have a really good experience. And this is a great thing to do around, you know, that experiential time in the office. So really, really great opportunity to create that buzz in the office. We don't know about loyalty on this. It's something that's really hard to measure. Obviously, we're continually monitoring our attrition rates. We are monitoring our donations. We know that we do get some feedback straight after thanking days from people uplifting their gifts and saying, you know, it was brilliant to get that message on thanking day. And at a previous organisation I worked for, there was someone who donated every other year, gave about £100,000. She was really overwhelmed with the thanking we did for her, and she wasn't due to give her gift that particular year, and she did. And it might have been the stewardship she'd had through the year, it might have been thanking day, but you just don't know with any thanking you do what it's going to lead to. So really, really important that you think about ways of measuring, but it is tricky. And then, of course, continually evaluating how these days are doing. So for us, it's all about planning for Thanking Day 2023. So huge thanks for inviting me today, Rob. I hope I've inspired you a little bit to do a thanking day. I really, really would encourage you to think about this as an organisation. You know, even if it's just a couple of hours or, you know, in the morning, please do think about this, because I think it's a really good way to, you know, put your donors at the centre. Thank you.
That's fabulous, Sonya. Thank you so much for coming along to share how you went about it and the kind of buzz it achieved. If Sonya, if you're now able to take those away, thank you. And then if Alice, you want to start to bring yours up. So yeah, like I said, what I wanted to do, because obviously different organizations have different levels of resource, different types of cause, different brand, different geographical focus. I wanted to share a different kind of charity as well. So I invited Alice. Now you might have heard the podcast I did, episode 103 with Alice, where she's talking about some of these ideas, but I'm imagining many of you haven't yet seen it. So while Alice just brings those slides up, we would love to hear your point of view on this, Alice, how you've gone about it, and tips and learnings, and also it's great to invite Alice back. I know you're a long-standing Breakfast Club person, so that's even part of this story. But over to you, Alice. What's been your experience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob. Thanks for having me here today. It was actually at one of these breakfast clubs 3 years ago that I first heard about Thankathons. So it's nice to be back and talking about it myself. So just trying to change the slide. A little bit about Chance for Childhood. We are a small INGO. We work in 5 countries across Africa, supporting children through access to safer spaces and inclusive education. And as it has been for many charities, the past 3 years have had their challenges, both in terms of fundraising, but also for the communities we're supporting. We are a smaller charity. Our income is under £1 million. And the fundraising team is 3, including myself. But quite uniquely for a charity of our size, we have over 1,000 regular givers. And like many other charities, these regular givers tend to be older. And when I joined the charity at the end of 2019, we had seen this downward trend of people stopping giving. So either because they had passed away, or because they were in their care home, or circumstances had changed that meant that they couldn't give. And so this was something that I was aware of when I first joined. And then a few months after joining, I was at a breakfast club, and 2 lovely ladies from MAGS, the Mine Alliance Group, did a presentation on thanking. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting idea. That might be something that I could take back to Chance for Childhood. And I remember mentioning it in passing to my CEO, and she absolutely loved the idea and was like, yeah, we should definitely think about that. And then a few weeks later, we all know what happened. There was a pandemic, all plans went out the window, and life became very different. And as this happened, you'll probably remember there were lots of statistics going around about the number of regular gifts being cancelled, people stopping their donations, and all sorts. And that became a real concern for us as a charity. Our regular givers make up our biggest amount of unrestricted income, so they are critical to our organisation. But not only that, I knew that because of the age of our regular givers, a lot of them would be having a really, really difficult time during the pandemic. They would likely be isolating at home, perhaps without family close by, and many of our donors are not using the internet, they're not literate in that, so even things like getting a food shop was probably going to be quite challenging for them. And so this started to play on my mind, and I was like, what are we going to do to try and stabilize this? And the Thankathon that I'd heard about came back to me, and I thought, yeah, this is the time to put that into practice. And so, as I said, we're a small charity. The bonus of that means that you can do things very quickly. We're quite flexible. So I called the CEO and I said, I'm doing the Thankathon. I want to do it next month. We need to get everyone involved. And she helped me build up support. We got our trustees involved. We got ambassadors involved, as many staff as possible. On the day, I think we had 10 people in total taking part. I pulled off a list from our database of regular givers that I thought we could call. And I said to staff, it's okay if you can only give 30 minutes, whatever time you can give will be really valuable. And then I just assigned those donors out to different staff members. And the end result was that we called about 200 people that first Thankathon. But the impact of that first Thankathon was much, much bigger. Firstly, it turned out to be this really amazing, positive team building experience. Just as Sonya was saying about creating the buzz in the office and how much colleagues love Thanking Day, that turned out to be the same for us. It had been an incredibly stressful time, but bringing the whole team together to focus on this one thing had so many benefits. We weren't thinking about targets, we weren't thinking about the impact on our programs, we were just all focused on saying thank you. And I had sent everyone a Kit Kat in the post, and I'd put this little virtual meeting in and said, okay, we can't be together in person, but let's take a coffee break together partway through the day and just check in and see how it's going. And that was really, really useful. We just spent 20 minutes sharing stories about the people we spoke to. So our head of programs had this lovely call with this 96-year-old woman who was about to celebrate her next birthday. Our chair of trustees spoke to someone who'd been supporting us since the very beginning, since the early 90s. And for a lot of these donors, they were probably used to hearing from me or someone else in the fundraising team, but the value of them hearing from a trustee or a chief executive or the head of programs was huge. Like, it's not an opportunity that those regular donors get that often. We were reminded how amazing our supporters are. Just like Sonya said, we all have amazing supporters. And during a time when there was a lot happening at home, a lot of people were looking internally, we were worried that actually as an international development charity, people wouldn't be thinking about our cause. But I spoke to donors who said, yeah, it's really hard. I've had a really tough time, but I know that the children you're working with have it worse, and I want to keep supporting you, whether that's £5 or £50. And to hear that was amazing, but also super motivating for staff who've been working flat out at the organisation through that time. And I think since then, it's really helped to build a culture in the organisation. We, as a fundraising team, now really pride ourselves on being relationship fundraisers. You know, we put donor care at the front of what we do because they are the most important people to us. And it is now 3 years on, and we've held a series of these Thankathons. And as Sonya said, it's really hard to measure them. But for us, we have noticed that there is a decline in cancellations in regular giving. So you'll remember I said at the beginning that we'd started to see that drop off, and we've now seen that stabilize, which for a charity of our size is amazing. And we like to think some of that's down to the Thankathon. It's probably down to a few things, but I think really putting donor care at the front of our fundraising team has helped to make that change. So if you're a small charity, I know that you're short on time, you're short on resource, you're short on money, but this doesn't have to cost a lot. Anyone can do this. In the very basic stages, you just need to pick up the phone. And if that's all you've got to hand, great, do it. If you've got more time, send emails to those you don't have phone numbers for. That's been really useful for us. We have A lot of donors who don't share their phone numbers these days for data privacy reasons, but using MailChimp just to send a thank you email out has had some really positive feedback. You can use your social media channels. We put something on our website every year, a big article. And we also encourage our teams in Africa to use their mobile phones to film short video clips. And this is really important because our work can feel so removed from our donors that actually getting a little message from someone in Rwanda talking about the impact of their donation is really exciting for them. And just to give you an example, it doesn't have to be super high quality or professional. This is our wonderful senior programs manager, Felician, in Rwanda, who, along with the rest of the team there, filmed some videos, took some pictures for us, and we just overlay some graphics in Canva for free, and that makes up our Thankathon. So, as I said, we're 3 years into this now, and there's a few things that we're learning on the way that might help you. The first thing, I think, is getting buy-in from someone in your leadership team. I was super lucky that early on my CEO saw the value in this, but since then, our trustees also see the value in it as well. Our chair of trustees makes it a rule. He says, you know, all trustees are expected to take part in this, and if you're not, then you better have a good excuse, because this is really important. It's also a lovely way for trustees to connect with your donors in a, you know, as something they wouldn't usually be able to do. But if you can get buy-in from someone at the top, that really helps. You don't have to start big. Just test it at a small scale and then size up. This could just be an afternoon that you spend with your team thanking to see if that works for you first. We all know it costs a lot more to acquire new donors than retain existing ones. So if your leadership team are saying, why are we spending staff time on this? Why are we spending money? I would say, look at your attrition rate. Like, how much is attrition costing you every month? And then reframe that. Say, okay, well, attrition's costing us £20 a month. How much are we willing to spend to retain our existing donors? Because that could be put to good use. And I think that's a really strong case for support. Collect feedback from donors. We do this all the time. If we get a nice email, if someone's posted something on Twitter. Last year, we had a marathon runner who really appreciated the thanking day and put something on his Instagram. And we saved that up to show the value, because for new members of staff, they might not understand why this is so important. But when they start to see that feedback and the buzz it creates, then it really gets them on board. And if you don't have time to do a day, that's fine. Do an hour. Just spend an hour picking up the phone saying thank you. If that works for you, do an hour every month. Like, if you're a lone fundraiser or a small team, I know that time is really precious, but you can make this to fit whatever resources or budget you have available. So that's it. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope this has been useful, and thanks to Rob for having me. I'm happy to chat to anyone about Thankathons, so my details are on screen, but I've also included the details of Sian, who is our individual giving officer and runs our Thankathons as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice. Such an interesting take on it, and clearly some real consistency with Sonya, but also I love some different things that you've done as well. Just one quick question to everybody. A couple of people were asking about slides. Sorry, we found that with our emailing software, it's not possible to send out these big heavy slide decks to everyone who signs up for Breakfast Club. So I'm sorry, we can't do that. But I wonder if Alice and Sonya are open to people contacting them directly on LinkedIn or something and potentially sharing. So thank you ever so much, Sonya and Alice, for people who would like that resource. We've got time for a few questions. This always happens. Apologies in advance if we don't get to your question. One resource might be to listen to the podcast episode 103 with Alice, if you a little bit more information there, and or we'll just if we don't get to your question, please contact the speakers directly. So one question was in terms of, Nicola asks, how do you pull together the data and organize who is calling who? Can I come to you for that one, Sonya?
Yes, so I think what's really key here is we have someone who's a project manager on other things. So we've we have them specifically working on this project. So they get the requirements from each of the teams. So I think one of the questions was, how do you prioritize different donors? It is down to individual teams. So you will know in your team, say if you're in the major gifts team, you know, who you want to prioritize, just like you will in individual giving. So all the briefs are put together by those teams, and then they will go to the data team. And the data team will pull off that data for us. Then the individual teams again need to select who's making those calls as well. So there's a question about who do you get to make the calls? So for example, the major gifts team might say, well, actually, we've got these 5 here, and we definitely want a trustee calling them, or we want a person in ops calling them. So again, they would prioritize that. But of course, we do need to think about GDPR as well. So making sure that because I think that was another question as well, when you get the files through, you know, making sure you followed all the GDPR rules is really important. That's all secure. And someone also asked about, you know, do you tell them about, you know, what conversations you've had in the past? I think we give minimal detail, but it's just, you know, if they've run the marathon, that's what they'll have. So it's like, thank you for running the marathon, you're amazing. Whereas we might do a little bit more for the major givers and the trusts.
Thank you very much, Sonia. A question for Alice. People who receive phone calls, is it a cold call out of the blue, or do they get a pre-warning that they might get a call that day?
So we have started warming people up. I think by now people expect the Thankathon to take place every year, so they've got used to it. But I remember on the first year, we'd put something on our website and also on emails to say we will be calling on Thursday. So if you get a call from us, you know, don't be surprised. It's just someone to say thank you. And now I think there's a lot more buzz around it, and donors are expecting it, so it's less of a cold call.
Great answer, thank you. All makes sense. Alice did talk about buy-in via that buy-in from the very top. Sonia, what's any tips you've got for someone who wants to do this, but they see the biggest barrier might be how to get buy-in, because this is not just a fundraising initiative, it needs the wider team's support?
Yeah. So 2 things. Firstly, I think just start by getting someone on your leadership team or your one of your trustees to do a thank you call. Just a thank you call to somebody. The power of that in itself will be brilliant. They will then be sold on the thanking, and then you can build up that you want to do it for the whole organisation, and they will get it. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is obviously telling the story around why fundraising is so important right now. You know, we're going to tougher economic climate. You know, we need financial stability. The fundraising team are stretched. I know all of you there will be working incredibly hard. We can't do it alone as fundraisers. So it's really telling that compelling story to your leadership team and trying to get some face time with your trustees so they understand that. So they can then understand the importance of thanking. And, you know, you are there to do it throughout the year. But if we can have a time when everyone does it, you know, that will really help with your fundraising results. Yeah, that's what I do.
I'm just really conscious of time, Sonia. I know you've got to get away to another meeting.
I can probably do 5 more minutes.
Please do get away for that, because I promised that that was going to be possible. And just one couple of people are asking, will there be a recording? I am going to send a recording out in a few days' time of this whole thing. So again, if you want to share this whole thing and people can look at the slides and see this recording, then you can do that. Thank you, Sonia. Alice, if you've got time to answer one more question, I'm just going to pose that to you, Alice. And it was just practical thing in terms of scripts. How well do you brief the people that are going to make a thank you call? Is it just a brief, couple of notes, or is it actually a script?
So we do a briefing call with board staff ahead of the Thankathon, and I'll also have separate briefing calls with staff, with trustees as well. And that's really just to talk through any tricky questions they might get or let them know what to expect. And then we don't provide a script, because I think the value of thanking is that it's really sincere and it doesn't sound like someone's reading off a script. But we will provide just some tips, some talking points, perhaps some highlights of the impact we've had over the past 12 months, just so they've got something to refer to. And like Sonya said, we give minimal background to anyone making these calls. So it might say, ran the marathon, interested in Ghana, particularly like this piece of work. And so before the calls, staff and trustees can see who's on their list, match that up with the briefing sheet, and just feel a bit more prepared ahead of time.
Great, that's really helpful, practical advice. So I need to let you get away as well, Alice. So thank you very much to Sonya and Alice for two fabulous presentations. Like I say, it's not practical for us to send out all the slides to everyone from our software, but thank you to Alice and Sonya for being open to being contacted via LinkedIn and so on. I'm going to send out a recording of this whole thing if you want to share that with your colleagues, or if you just want a neat 25-minute version, then like I say, do listen to episode 103 of the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast, in which Alice shares this same story. It's a really easy way of just getting some of your colleagues on board with it. For those of you who have not yet subscribed, you can get all 105 episodes. Just pick and choose which ones you want to listen to, as well as Alice's one. But just go to iTunes or Spotify or wherever and subscribe to that other free resource as well. So as well as free resources like Breakfast Club 4 times a year and the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast, where we try and get out an episode most weeks with this kind of content, these kinds of stories. If you want to go deeper with Bright Spots, some of you are well aware of our flagship training things we do. Obviously, there's the Corporate Mastery Program and the Major Gifts Mastery Program. They go usually twice a year. I'm really sorry to those of you who've been trying to book on to the October one. It has been sold out for several weeks now, so sorry for disappointment. But because the demand seems to be higher than ever before, we are looking at whether we can bring the planned next date forward from April to potentially doing it pretty early in January 2023, or certainly some point January or February 2023. So if you're interested, do get in touch directly with me, or potentially through the form that I think Katie might in a moment put in the chat box. There's a link there if you want to find out more. The other thing we do to help you as a leader is the Bright Spot Members Club, which is our training and inspiration site. So I know there's quite a lot of you who are members of that club are on Breakfast Club as well. There's 350 people in Bright Spot Members Club, but it's lots of my best training films. Each week we do a live masterclass or workshop, sometimes on my own or sometimes with an excellent guest speaker of the type you've just had. There's a supportive community there. There's more than 50 of these learning video bundles you can access whenever you like, 24/7, all kinds of different topics in fundraising and leadership. There's lots of people just access on their own, and that's £42 a month, or probably if you already know you like my content because of the podcast or because you've been on one of my training sessions, then the most efficient way cost-wise is to sign up for the year, because then you get 12 months access for the price of 9, so that's saving £126. Or the other really efficient thing is, if you're a leader and there's more than 3 or 4 people in your team, at least 3 or 4 people in your team, then there's much bigger discounts for getting your team access to the Members Club content. So do get in touch with me if you're interested in any of those things. But for now, I want to change mode, and just for the whatever it is 30 minutes I've got available, share some things that I hope might just help across this difficult winter that is coming. You know, you don't need me to tell you that in tough economic times, when people are having to make difficult choices about how they spend their money, inevitably fundraising gets hard in various ways as well, obviously hitting individual giving income and sponsorship income, but across the board, not least because it's not only about the finite financial resources people have got, but also if we're about to have a winter with some strikes and yet more bad news with prices and inflation, the media message will repeatedly be causing people to be more worried about their money. All of these things are going to hurt. Not least also, you know, the impact on yourself, ourselves, people in your team who are worrying about their own ability to put food on the table and so on. There just are obviously some challenges coming and likely, you know, usually I do my best to be optimistic, but in case there's a chance things go from bad to worse this winter, I wanted to share some things that might just help. There's 5 main ideas. Now, I'm not promising there'll be 5 things you never would have thought of yourself. Inevitably, you're probably already doing some or all of these, but there's a big difference between having a good idea and managing to execute either yourself or managing to get your team to follow through on a sensible approach to fundraising in difficult times. So with that in mind, I wanted to share some things, and hopefully my examples or something about the way I do it might just help you hold your nerve and follow through and do some things to help you succeed this autumn and winter. I wanted to start with this brilliant talk. Some of you know Davinia. She did a talk at Breakfast Club in 2021 about her experiences of the pandemic in 2020, and she also shared that story in episode 62 of my podcast. And the gist of how she started was, in March 2020, she was just, for whatever reason, she could tell that this wasn't just going to be a 1-month nightmare. She had a feeling it was going to go on for some time, and she had the wherewithal to think, what is my normal strategy when times get hard? Normally, she says, I just double down and work harder. But I've just realized that wasn't going to be tenable if this pandemic lockdown headaches are going to go on and on. So that's not an option. What am I going to do differently in this very special crisis? And what she decided to do was make choices about how she was going to be and what values she was going to prioritize in her own leadership behavior from the start to give her and her team a chance of surviving this difficult crisis. And some of the values she talks about are kindness and growth mindset and learning and being a bit more nimble and quick to move in these tumultuous times. First of those, she's really clear, is kindness was the most important. I've got to be kind to myself. I can't get everything right, but I've got to keep plugging away and forgive myself, but be kind to myself where I can, look after myself, and extend that kindness to my team. So that's our culture. And kindness to our donors. They sent out loads of proactive, lovely messages, not asking for such stuff, but just appreciating people. So without going into all of those values she talks about, I suggest 4 of the things I'm going to tell you today are fundraising approaches. But the first one is, frankly, the most important, is how are you going to manage your state across this metaphorical winter that is coming? Literal and, frankly, metaphorically, the winter might be longer than the real winter. How are you going to manage your state? Because unless your morale is okay and your energy levels are okay, and you have some sense of optimism, it's really hard to lead and implement the other 4 main things. So idea 1 for how you do that. I mean, easy to say that, Rob. I know it's hard to do that. But before autumn starts, I suggest step 1 is to do what Davinia did and reflect, see what might come, not to panic you, but to make decisions about what values you'll prioritize. Idea 2. This came from Di Gornall, who is now at Sustrans. She was at Centrepoint, I think, when I interviewed her in summer of 2020. She had done pretty well. I mean, lots of you done brilliantly through the pandemic, but her morale was pretty good. Her team were doing pretty well. They'd raised a lot of money. And I interviewed her to find out, as a leader, how is she doing? Her spirit's still quite good. She said that the single most thing I've done isn't a fundraising thing. It isn't even a leadership thing, Rob. It's my 25-minute bike ride every morning. Almost every morning for that first 3 months of the pandemic, she would get up a bit earlier to do some exercise on her static bike. And then she'd shower and then come to be able to attack the tough decisions of pandemic and lockdown time, having looked after her own well-being and energy levels first. She talked about this book that both she and I have read and liked, called The Miracle Morning. And the basic gist of the book is, it's really tempting to get round to your exercise or your meditation or whatever the thing, playing the piano, being grateful for 5 minutes, whatever your thing is that you know is good for you. It's so tempting to get round to it at lunchtime or in the evening. And Hal Elrod says that's usually too late because the day gets at you and then it doesn't happen. So the critical thing is, before the day starts coming at you, do your 10 minutes of meditation or exercise or being grateful first. If you can just build that habit now as winter approaches, that's probably a practical thing that can make all the difference to you be able to handle the difficult stuff that then comes at you when your working day starts. And the third thing that can help with our morale, if you really study what changes our state from panicky and fearful to potentially, willing to be bold and on the front foot and so on, and optimistic and positive energy. Well, one thing is those kinds of morning habits that I mentioned, just sensible stuff like eating well, drinking water, exercise, and so on. But another thing that affects how you feel is what your brain thinks things mean. And if we're not careful and we just do too much staring at our phones automatically just to stay informed, lots and lots of fear, scary, difficult stories will keep coming at us from the media. So that doesn't help our state. The obstacle is the way really helped me through the pandemic. And the basic idea is, in any difficult thing, even a really horrible difficult thing, in addition to the negatives, usually, says Marcus Aurelius, there are opportunities within those difficult things. And you can probably remember, some things across the pandemic turned out to be positives, relative positives, that you wouldn't now have achieved had it not been for the pandemic. Ryan Holiday says, right from the start, when a crisis is coming, be determined to seek out the positives it brings as well as the obvious negatives. And just one of the people that really inspired me recently was when I talked to Phoebe Cooper. She works in individual giving at the animal charity, the RSPCA, quite a well-known charity. And she came on the podcast episode 100, and she talked about this concept of the obstacle is the way that she'd heard on my podcast and my breakfast clubs. And there's something about it just resonated with her. So she talks about things she and her colleagues have done across the last 3, 4, 5 months, where she's quite deliberately been on the front foot. Now, again, I'm well aware lots of you guys have already done really good stuff to do with the cost of living. So I'm not saying, she's any different, but 2 or 3 of these success stories really appealed to me. She's already really early on, she went to talk to her supporter care team about what happens if people need to call up to potentially cancel. And she worked with them and they brainstormed things that you can do. And the key insight, which is really interesting to me, is she got donor focused, which is, it's not money or no money, people like animals or don't like animals. Her insight was, if someone loves animals, they've been supporting us for years, they probably really don't want to have to call us to stop giving and lose the identity of that is really cherished and proud for them of not being able to do their bit for a cause they deeply care about. That's a horrible call to have to make. So let's get empathetic with them and just listen, sympathize. If they need and want to cancel, totally do that, but also offer them other options for how you can still carry on being a lover of animals and a supporter of the RSPCA. And that led to various different options in terms of breaks from paying and carry on supporting, but only £2 a month, and get involved in campaigning if you need to cancel, various things. And all credit to her colleagues who've done brilliant effort in taking those calls and having some great conversations with their supporters. Secondly, right in the summer, let's get ahead of it, and they send out a purely thank you letter to, and it's imagine how many people support RSPCA. It's a lot of people. It's no small undertaking, no small decision. It's a thank you message from the chief exec saying, in these tough times, we especially grateful for you looking out for animals. And if we understand that times are tough, but if you are able to keep supporting, that's wonderful. And please look at this wonderful film. And then there's a link to a brilliant film they put together, which is quite raw and just sort of cobbled together, but really passionate messages from people on the front line protecting animals, thanking donors into the camera for what they do. But that whole initiative came from the concept of the obstacle is the way. How can we be proactive and find opportunities rather than reactive in these difficult times? And lastly, she and her colleagues have got really curious about how they can encourage people to understand and claim more gift aid. And without going into all the detail, so last time of counting, that was a value of £250,000 they've proactively generated through telephone calls, rather than what many people do is send letters and emails. Telephone calls to help people understand gift aid. And like she says it's not just income so far, it's now that they've signed up for gift aid, there'll be future income as well. She took proactive different takes on how you can help someone understand gift aid. Basically, all those three things come from the concept of the obstacle is the way, which is not easy to do when times are tough and you're cold. But if you can look after yourselves and find the energy for searching, then apart from anything else, it's a great survival strategy because you feel you're on the front foot rather than on the back foot of these horrible world events. Idea 2, I know this is really obvious, but when there's really difficult times because of costs or fear or Ukraine or whatever it might be, it might be obvious to you and your colleagues about how that's making life for your beneficiary group you serve harder. But the more you can find the detail and spell out why life is harder for certain people now, that can make all the difference. One example I heard just recently is from someone who works for Shelter, who's a very good fundraiser at Shelter. And they told me about this really interesting story of someone who contacted Shelter because they were really distraught. A lot of their distress was caused, in addition to the fact times were tough financially, that they're in trouble with the primary school because their daughter was truanting, absenteeism, and they were only going to school 3 days a week. And this was potentially going to lead to fines and trouble for the parent. And the Shelter person listened to what was going on. And the gist was they could only afford one school uniform. And since the washing machine had broken and they couldn't afford to get that fixed either, their way of surviving was to for the girl to wear the uniform for 3 days while it was just about wearable. And then rather than risk embarrassment and bullying when the uniform was really dirty and smelly, she would stay at home. And the Shelter person was sympathetic, understood, and helped on her behalf, applied for a grant so that she could buy a second-hand washer dryer, which she did. And that simple intervention meant that the child was able to go to school every day. Attendance was perfect, and presumably lots of stress went down for the parent as well, and the girl was able to go to school. So I think if fundraisers can give specific examples of what's tough during these difficult times, it really cuts through and helps people who care about your cause connect to what really just how tough things can be. I was talking to someone who works for an arthritis charity, and they were telling me, I think it was on Panorama, though I've never seen it myself, about someone who was on Panorama talking about the pain, the agony they get from their arthritis is worse than when they had cancer and the tough treatments treating cancer, that the arthritis agony is worse. And the single thing that is most relieving of that pain is a hot bath. And he said, my supporters aren't necessarily thinking cost of living crisis, fuel's expensive. I bet arthritis people have got that's hurting their pain relief right now. So the ability to explain that the one thing that can help with someone's pain, hot bath, is no longer available to them if money is tough. Being able to explain those not obvious details is a powerful discipline that potentially for your team to practice. So idea 1, what's hard, even if it's obvious, what's harder for your beneficiary group now? Crucially, an interesting question is, what's not immediately obvious? It's obvious to your colleagues, but what's not obvious to the layperson about why that's harder now during this winter or these political events? And crucially, the more real examples you can get flowing through your organization, it makes all the difference. That one I mentioned from Shelter, it was one of the things that was said that led to a corporate partnership worth £50,000. I know that it's not always easy to get these real examples. There are challenges that as a leader you need to solve, but if you'd like some encouragement and tactics and more examples, do listen to episode 98 of my podcast, where Ben Swart and I are just helping with various approaches to help you get your team these examples they can share with their supporters. Next idea, it's part of the human condition, I think, that when people are complaining, oh, there's an obvious problem, most of your working day goes to solving that difficult thing, which often leaves relatively little time to go to the people who are just cheerful and happy and not being a squeaky wheel, if you see what I mean. Whereas this Forrester research says, if you proactively go to the people who really like your charity and are not problematic, that in commercial terms leads to 9 times more growth and income than spending all your time solving the problems. And the key insight here is, I mean, it's always true, but it's especially true to tune into it now this winter. Some of the people who support your charity care more deeply than others. And some of the people in any market, corporate, major gifts, individual giving, some of them actually are more inclined and able to want to be generous, even in tough times, than others. So there's various ways of you trying to work out who is who, but even at a common sense level, my third tip is do your best to apply the 80-20 principle. If you know the Pareto law, the 80-20 principle, that 80% of revenue in most companies tends to come from just a smaller number, 20% of those big spending clients. So the better you look after those, the more you're likely you are to get the 80%. And at its simplest, I suggest, if you've got 30 major donors, who are the top 5? Can you give them more love this winter than normally they might get? Same for corporates, same for clubs and associations. Of course, we'd love to do wonderful thanking and stewardship for all of them. And you might need to be efficient in some ways, but if you've only time to make 3 calls a week, know who must get those calls proactively, because they might not be making a problem for you and asking for attention, being proactive for the top 20%. So it's a really good example on episode 100 of Rachel Catola. And she tells the story of a donor who was giving £50 a month, and once or twice a year gave £1,000 a month. In March 2020, they gave an extra 500. She called up to make a thank you call, and then carried on sending nice thank you letters and calls with impact stories across the year. Fast forward to May 2021, that donor cancelled their £50 a month gift and set up a £1,000 a month, every month gift. And he said it was because of all these amazing, lovely, no one else sends me lovely thank you letters. So even if thank you cards seems obvious to you, to them, it may well be a massive wow that's completely different to everything else coming through their letterbox that month. So Rachel, she was proactive with the ones that could obviously do more, and she was really disciplined about following through on that. If all of your team are able to identify their top 20%, even if they don't instantly start, identifying the top 20% is a valuable discipline in and of itself. And then the risk is that in some markets, this is not quite so true in individual giving, but for lots of high value giving like corporate major gifts, community and so on, the risk in panicky times, money tight times, is people search for money. Where's the next partnership? Where's the next big gift? And I suggest, if you possibly can, help your team worry less about the money and more about more coffees or more conversations. Some would call this engagement, but I think somehow coffees or come to my free inspiring event, there's something much more crunchy than how can we lift engagement. There's a brilliant book by Cal Newport, and he makes the same point. He says, in commercial organizations, the ones that do best don't just measure lag measures. So if you are a bakery, they don't, and you want to improve customer satisfaction, they don't just measure how good is our customer satisfaction, because it's too late. If it's bad, it's already bad. They measure lead measures, like how many free samples are we giving away of our lovely cakes? Because obviously the more you measure and encourage the lead measures, that's the thing that drives up what you really want, which is for customers to be more satisfied. And applying this in the fundraising world, some of you have heard me talk about the brilliant Cleo, who came on our Major Gifts Mastery program. She liked this concept of focus on test drives, not selling cars, coffees, not money. And she went back to her brilliant team at Shelter Box, and their income has grown and grown since their KPIs were these lead measures, not lag measures. So her team don't have KPIs to do with money. They do have KPIs. How many coffees can you, or chats can you have per month? And how many wow moments can you create for supporters per month? And what you measure increases creativity. One of the best stories she shares in that episode of the podcast is it just caused them, how on earth can we radically increase the number of these positive moments and these chats? And they had the idea of making it their system, their habit, to look on the database for when is the anniversary of when anyone made a gift. And then on that anniversary, to proactively make a thank you call or send a thank you note if they don't have the phone number, and out of the blue, thank the person and say, yeah, I'm just calling from this charity because a year ago you did an amazing thing and I wanted you to know what a difference it's made. They started making those calls. And what's great about this is it's not relying on, I know a wet Tuesday, whether someone in your team does or doesn't have the motivation to be brave on the phone. This is just what we do. This week, we're making these 4 calls or sending these 4 thank you cards. One particular story she shares on the podcast is of someone who, straight after receiving that thank you call, changed their regular gift from £200 a month to £400 a month. So not everyone's going to do that, but being proactive in increasing conversations, not chasing money, is a thing I recommend. My last main idea is add value consistently. Like, anyone can have a good day when they send a thank you card. The challenge is, how do you find a way across the next 6 months or longer to have a regularity or consistently of adding value? And one of the stories I love was from Susie Thompson at Royal Northern College of Music. She shared on the Breakfast Club about a year ago, a key thing they did from March 2020 was every week for the first 3 months, they managed to publish to their database of 5,000 supporters a short story or blog along the theme, keep the music playing, because it's a music college. Now, to be clear, some of them aren't big, long, fancy things, but it's just this drip, 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 like Sonya says, the drum beat. And there was a point where they couldn't do it every week. So then maybe it was every other week. But the key thing, they keep dripping these stories. So then when in the autumn of 2020, they came to do an appeal and they asked for money. Oh my goodness. They'd already been doing some other fundraising success as well, but as an appeal, they'd never before raised more than £20,000. This year, they're optimistic because other things were going well. The stretch target was £50,000. What did they raise? £250,000 they raised. So whatever it is, 5 times more than an already stretched target. I said, Susie, why did it work? She said, actually, lots of different things. But the major reason is we managed to add value consistently to these people. And then we asked for money, and they absolutely connected to what the money was going to. So this is one of the hardest because resources are tough. Maybe you've got recruitment challenges. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying, and you can't do everything, but if you could find the 1 or 2 ways that your team can drip, 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 consistently add value, I would say that's one of the best things that will help get you through. Most charities, at its simplest, like, you can't all do a blog a week. You can't all do a monthly event like Children's Hospice Southwest have been doing. But at its simplest, if everyone's got a stack of lovely thank you cards on their desk, and you manage for everyone to send out 3 of those a week when a donor does something nice or a volunteer does something nice, that's the thing that most charities, I think, could do. Beware, before you start doing this, go and check the thank you cards. If it's a 12-year-old image and it's a picture of your building, rather than what these ones I'm sharing, and this is wonderful ones from Mousetrap Theatre Projects that Gail shared with me kindly. Now, make sure you've got designed some cards, which when I look at it, I just get a wonderful feeling about the difference the charity is making on the outside image and the quote inside from a grateful beneficiary or parent or something. If you get those now and everyone gets in the habit of sending out 3 a week, at its simplest, that's a very doable thing. And or some of the Thankathon tactics, and or explore something like Bonjoro that Sonya mentioned, and or can you get some consistency of sharing stories, and or Facebook Lives during the pandemic. Some charities did that brilliantly, and Laura Crowdace on my podcast talks about just has some of the wonderful difference that made to engagement and then in due course support. And like I said, at its simplest, one thing I would do is, if you really want to grow or survive, add some kind of events which aren't about asking for money, but events which entice people to get involved and feel a stronger connection. That's a massive game changer. Be aware, your colleague might think they've only got resources to do one event. And my advice would be, by all means, do one, do it virtually, so it's super cheap, but treat it as a pilot, but have a plan to turn it into a series, because it's this, Children's Hospice Southwest, month in, month out across 2020, they would do a simple 1 hour webinar virtual meetup for their corporate supporters. And that's what led, a major reason that led to the massive success of their corporate giving club in the winter of 2020. So maybe you can't do it every month, but have a mindset. How can we make it easier to do an event? Not one big fancy flash one that's expensive, some easier way, virtually or in real time, where we help people connect to the difference they're making. They hear the stories, they connect with each other, and they become ever more proud of the difference they are making. So like I say, I know some of the things I've said are obvious. I also know some of them are not easy to do in good times, let alone resource-strapped times. But I hope some of the things I shared, and maybe the examples I shared, might just give you an extra little 10% to your mojo to, in September, follow through on certain things that will help this autumn and winter. Out of all the things I've shared, what stood out to you? Maybe it's just something to help you follow through on what you were going to do anyway, or maybe there was a new idea that you got from Sonya or Alice. In terms of my ideas, just as a quick recap, like I say, first of all, the last 4 ideas, you're really unlikely to do them well unless you look after yourself first. So think of what Davinia did and Diagonal did, morning habits, and then what Phoebe did in fight. The obstacle is the way. Doesn't mean when you've got a member of staff who's really having a tough time because they can't pay their bills, it obviously doesn't mean, well, look on the bright side. For game 1 for a leader is to be truly empathetic and care. And from your point of view, can you look after yourself and then find the resources to search for opportunity even in tough times? Can you get the messaging, the telling of the story working so that your supporters who care about your cause connect to what's even more important now this winter and get those stories? Pareto law, if nothing else, don't try and do everything, just do the 3 calls, because you know which 3 corporates must have them this week, for instance. So top 20%, could make all the difference rather than to be perfect for everyone. Focus on coffees and chats and engagement, and come to your free event rather than chasing the money, unless you're doing an emergency appeal. And lastly, this is hard, but find a way to pick the tactics that you can follow through on consistently adding value. That will help with you also asking for money. Okay, so we got you just about away by 10 o'clock. Like I said, I'm going to send out a recording of this whole thing in a few days' time. So do by all means share that with your team or something if it helps you pass on some of these ideas. Thank you ever so much, as always, to everyone who shares this stuff or tweets about it or puts it on LinkedIn so that these ideas can help as many charities as possible during these difficult times. I really appreciate your help if and when you ever find a moment to do that. I'm going to do another Breakfast Club in December. I hope I'll try and put together a date for that, for another thing to get us through. And like I say, if you do nothing else, subscribing to my podcast so you can go into more depth on some of the examples I've shared also might be a useful thing to do if you've not already subscribed to Fundraising Bright Spots. So that's it. Best of luck today. Look after yourselves. Best of luck over the next few months. And thank you for coming to Breakfast Club. That's it. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon.